For more on Brexit, let's bring in Garret Martin, professional lecturer and co-director of the Transatlantic Policy Centre at American University. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So obviously in this scramble to get Brexit done, we did see this denial of Prime Minister Boris Johnson's Brexit deal in the UK Parliament. What did that accomplish by denying having that vote?
Well, I think it's put all these key issues further on the table. I think what we're going to be seeing now in the next few days is really finally probably a crunch time. I know we've said that many times, there's been a lot of boy crying for wolf, but I think now it does look like we are going to have some fundamental questions that will need to be resolved.
And one of the criticisms that UK lawmakers had was that they essentially needed more time to review the deal and have more expansive debate before the vote. Now, there's a programme motion that's tabled for Tuesday. How key is that going to be?
I think it's going to be important because it's certainly unusual for a bill of that constitutional magnitude for it to have so little time. Of course, from the perspective of the government, they want to put the pressure. They want to keep the deadline in mind, saying essentially it's a binary choice between our deal and no deal. Of course, on the other side, they are strengthened by what happened on Saturday with the Ben Act kicking in and knowing that in all likelihood, if there needs to be more time, that extension will probably be granted. So that will be interesting to see how that plays out.
Now, it was interesting because Boris Johnson was obviously very vocal about October 31st, you know, Britain leaving, do or die. I'd rather be dead in a ditch than ask for an extension. But obviously he was now forced to send that extension letter. But you have some voices within the EU, like French President Emmanuel Macron, saying, what's the point of an extension? What is your take on that?
Well, my sense is that Mr. Macron is playing a well-rehearsed role of playing the bad cop here. I think from the perspective of the EU, of course, ideally, they want an orderly withdrawal, but they would want this to finish. But they still are wary about a no deal. So I think they want to see how things play out. They want to keep that pressure of uncertainty. But I think if push comes to shove, I still feel there's strong sentiment within the EU27 for an extension.
And so in terms of their reaction to what we saw today and sort of what they're looking for in terms of possible amendments that might come through, how is the EU taking all this on?
Well, I think for the EU, the exact nature of the amendment, I'm not sure is quite as important as making sure that there is a passage. Now, that being said, I think in all likelihood, because let's not forget, most of the attention is focused on Westminster, but there still will need to be ratification by the European Parliament. So not only do we have this tough timetable by October 31st, but the European Parliament will not be in session again until mid-November. So even in the best case scenario, Brexit date would probably be late November.
So then, speaking of things that we should be looking at, what options are still realistically on the table right now, and what sort of timetable could we be looking at?
Well, I think what will be interesting to see is, my sense is that the so-called second reading, which is sometimes hard to understand, basically just means that you can proceed with a greater scrutiny of the bill. It'll be interesting to see what amendments are put forward. And I think the two likely amendments, one will be a softer Brexit, so basically trying to keep the UK in the customs union. And number two is this idea of a confirmation vote. You know, you had 1 million people out in the streets of London basically calling for the second referendum. You have Liberal Democrats, you have a number of Labour voters who would like this. So I think this will be important. But of course, if that happens, a referendum takes generally at least 5 to 6 months to be organized, further pushing the can down the road.
So do we have any idea of what the tipping point might be, whether it comes to a general election or a second referendum?
That's hard to say because, you know, of course, an election will happen. It will happen soon. Again, it's hard to know the exact deadline, but I think, of course, Boris Johnson wants it soon. And I think the opposition cannot delay it forever. But it's not clear that it will give a decisive result. The result or the repercussion of these Brexit negotiations over these years has been depolarization. So we could end up with, again, a very hung parliament without a clear majority. We could have, even if we have a referendum, we could have a very close result, which will leave the UK very divided again.
So once again, the only certainty at this point is uncertainty. Thank you as always for your comments. Thank you so much, Garret Martin, there, professorial lecturer and co-director of the Transatlantic Policy Centre at American University.